Good morning and welcome to the church. Thank you so much for being here. As many of you know, we do these monthly series which are about artists talking about their work. And this morning we are very honored, very happy, and very excited to have Matt Satz with us. Obviously, Matt Satz is a Brooklyn-born but long-term Long Island resident, somebody who has been greatly inspired by living out here, somebody who has been a very strong member of the community, and in many ways a bridge from an older generation to a younger generation. Matt, as many of you know, received his BA from Brandeis, and his practice has evolved with this interest in and challenge to the history of painting, especially the history of painting in the 20th century. He is in numerous collections here, as well as in Europe, and obviously institutional collections of his work include Yale, the Parish, and Guildhall. Matt, we have a rolling series of images behind us. Matt will be talking. We do like to use these Sunday mornings as a way of having a conversation with the artist. It's a great privilege to be able to look through artists' eyes. However, if you do have questions, Matt is willing to actually make this more of a conversation. So if you do, please raise your hand or shout out if you are more exuberant in your personality. And I should say a personal thank you to Matt. I phoned up Matt, sort of explained some of this show to him, and explained that I really wanted to borrow one of his smoke paintings because of the way it kind of stands with a foot in two worlds, with both the fugitive nature of the smoke as well as the moment that you look at it kind of being collapsed into one moment. And I thought that that added a very interesting dimension to the exhibition. And lastly, there is a wonderful monograph of Matt's work at the front desk, so if you're curious and want to take a look at images in another form, please stop by and see that. And with that, Matt, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. So first, I just wanted to thank Sarah for including me in this exhibition. I haven't shown publicly out here for quite some time, and I love to be in the company of heroes of mine like Sala Witt and Mel Bachner, and this is the context that I'm always striving to be in the company of, and Sarah and Sherry and everyone here at the church. I'm grateful that this situation is here and that Eric and April had the foresight to create an institution like this that has a little more flexibility in what they can do without, needing to please people outside of what they believe in. So I'm appreciative of that. And we decided we would start with specifically talking about my smoke painting, which I did in 2015. I've been working here since 1995. I came out here in 95 after I graduated from Brandeis, and just tried to start having a career somehow. I met a bunch of artists who opened their arms to me, and it was certainly a different time then. Kurt Vonnegut was hanging out in Sagaponack, and Joseph Heller was in Amagansett. I had the opportunity of working with Glenn Horowitz, who had a wonderful bookshop in East Hampton, where on Sundays people would just congregate, and it was a real salon-style situation there, where people would just walk in off of the street, and next thing you know, Richard Prince is in there buying books, or Bob Colacello's in there, and it really cemented for me this circle of people that have been tremendously influential in the art world, literary world, and people were accessible. So that's basically where I started finding my influences. So to get back to the smoke painting, I did this painting in 2015. I had spent 12 years here, year-round, from 95. And then after being here for 12 years, I had opportunities to work in other places. So this smoke painting was done in Miami, actually. I had worked in LA prior, and subsequently in Miami. I was spending my winters in warmer climates. The smoke paintings themselves started out as very monochromatic works that were much denser than what you see above there. But with these slides, you'll be able to see that there's an evolution in the work where they started out as monochromatic and very tight. I was really interested in exploring the use of smoke, which came to me through exploring artists like Yves Klein, who was playing with fire. There was an artist by the name of Otto Pina, who was part of the Group Zero, who was doing these giant soot circles at MIT. And Yoko Ono actually did a smoke painting in the 60s. Duke Appeal as well, who came to me through Donald Batchelor. Alberto Burri was burning materials. And first coming out here, I was interested in really finding my voice. And there were artists that have led me down this path where I was interested in making significant marks. And the smoke paintings really evolved out of the desire to challenge the lines of other artists. So I happened to be in the city one day, and I saw this kid marking up the ceiling in a subway car with a lighter. And I just thought, oh, that's a very interesting way to make a mark. And I just connected that to all of the research that I had been doing with all the artists that I had just mentioned, and also the idea of the origin. And this is something I just discovered in hindsight, where these are basically my third mature works. I started with these flypaper paintings, which you'll see in these slides, and then those flypaper paintings led to the tar and feather paintings. The tar and feather paintings led to the painted tar and feather paintings, and then the smoke paintings came quickly after that, and also led to the strip paintings, which I can explain in further depth. But the real impetus was to find my voice and to make a mark that I could call my own and challenge the lines of other artists, specifically Cy Twombly and Bryce Martin, and artists really known for their lines. So going from the very dense and monochromatic smoke paintings, and also finding myself in a different environment in Miami, led me to explore color in a different way. And the paintings became blended in color. They ended up being less dense and opening up. And actually, prior to working in Miami, I was working in LA, where I made these first multicolored smoke paintings. And the skies there influenced me. The size of my studio influenced the dimensions of the work, and they became larger, multicolored, and the LA works in comparison to the Miami works were still more open than the original monochromatic works, but less dense than the Miami works. So over time, they just seemed to open up a bit more and become more infused with color. The LA works had a much more acidy palette, and the Miami works were a little more subdued, which definitely relates to the environment that I was in there. This work here is from the LA series, and this one as well. So you can see that the colors are a bit more drastic. And so I think that basically wraps up what I need to say about the smoke paintings. If anyone has any questions, yes?
How exactly are they made?
So I'm not very interested in talking about specific process. I use fire.
But it doesn't include fire?
Yes. and there's no top coat, so the paint and the smoke are sharing the same surface, and I'm making individual marks that eventually become an overall form. So the paint is wet when the smoke is applied, and I'm interested in trying to have some type of cohesive feeling with the painting. Sometimes I'm working in areas where I make a gesture where I'm not totally happy with the mark, and that could lead to areas in the painting that end up being too dense or there's a lack of harmony, and I have the ability to paint over those paintings. So sometimes there are 4 or 5 paintings underneath a finished smoke painting. And from the smoke paintings, I ended up, and this is something that I spoke to Sarah about, there's a real evolution in the discovery of my work and the paths that I choose to go down. I came up with this formula where there's basically a concept dictates a process, and the aesthetic is the end result of that formula. And I'm interested in working in areas where other artists have, tread, and I can find little voids in a history where I'm able to put my own signature on what it is that I'm trying to accomplish. So I'm constantly having this dialogue with my predecessors and artists that I, truly respect and value in a historical canon, in a historical context. So I'm really interested in challenging a history of painting, and a lot of the work that I'm making I'm really thinking about what it is that I'm doing. If I'm going down a road with a series of works, there's a lot of forethought that goes into it, and the work has to accomplish the end means I'm always looking for a graceful and an intellectual solution to whatever the problem happens to be. So, yes.
Oh, no, it's okay. There was one of these paintings, another one, there was a diptych with a smoke painting, and it looked like there was a fiber material, almost like a Manzoni acro. Is that correct?
When it pops back up, you'll tell me.
Okay.
So Matt, maybe I missed the story, but which were the people, what is the chronology? Which were the pieces that you started?
So my first mature works were these flypaper paintings. I've made these flypaper paintings. Actually, I think that's what Sherry we'll see if it pops up. This is a painted tar and feather painting. And I can come back to that. That's a strand piece. These are the flypaper paintings. So these are my first mature works. These works came out of the idea of having a work that exhibited a lifespan. So I made these flypaper paintings. They were sitting in my studio. They were attracting material that was in the studio, sometimes bugs, sometimes dust, sometimes hair. And all of that evidence of their environment ends up in the painting. So they were influenced specifically by Sigmar Polke, who at one point used, I believe it was cobalt chloride, for a piece that he did in the, where is this? Yes, he used cobalt chloride at the Venice Biennale in the exhibition Anthor, where he basically just covered these walls with cobalt chloride. So in the morning, there was a reaction relative to humidity and dew point where the walls were either purple or blue, and then later in the evening they would change to either being blue or purple. So there was this ability to create a painting that actually changed with its environment. And that was really the impetus for making these flypaper paintings. So, and I started doing those in '98. And there's one hanging in my studio now. So, and then from the flypaper paintings, we went to the tar and feather painting. So we basically have works that show an evidence of a lifespan, and then we have works that are killing off painting in a conceptual way. The idea of tar and feathering initially was a practice by the French where when the taxpayer came to collect their money, they supposedly tarred and feathered the tax man. So, and if you look in the dictionary, it's a process that it's punishment for crimes committed against a society that could possibly lead to death. So it's a humiliating punishment for crimes against a society. And I just thought that the idea of killing off painting in that sense, in 2005, I had the opportunity to tar and feather the Parish Museum, which was an amazing thing to do in the company of, you know, all these art historical figures from John Chamberlain to Malcolm Morley to Eric Fischel and David Sally. It was a way to you know, kill off the institution in a way where there could lead to a potential for a rebirth or something new. And I think any artist that's, you know, worth their weight is trying to create a level playing field or create an environment where they're paying, I mean, I'm paying homage to my predecessors and the artists that have influenced me before, but at the same time I want to create a new path. And the tar and feather paintings, for me, are really significant in that manner. And as far as the idea of a concept and a process leading to an aesthetic, I haven't been able to find a work where the concept and the process have equal weight in that formula. So the tar and feather paintings, really, for me, are exemplary in the idea that there's a concept that has equal weight with the process, because the process has no significance unless you understand the concept, and the concept has no consequence without the process. So, and the aesthetic is just what it is. And then from the tar and feather paintings, in order to return to painting, how do you kill off painting, your second series, and you know, an super early career, how do you return to painting? I painted over a tar and feather painting and found that, you know, in the process of that the tar actually had a chemical reaction with the oil paint, and there was another type of insidious growth, you know, or change in the painting that I didn't really have control over. But, you know, there was a bit of a lifespan or a fight for life in making those works as well. So to return to painting, I created those painted tar and feather paintings, and that allowed me to go down, you know, these other paths that I've chosen to go down. And to get back to Sherry's question, so the smoke painting that you pointed out, the diptych, those are tar and feather paintings. So, exactly. So that painting was actually, that's my Miami studio that I had at the time, and that painting was in a show that I had in Houston with a woman by the name of Barbara Davis. And really the impetus for making those paintings was that I saw the relationship between really just the colors of the smoke and the tar and feather paintings, and I just thought that they would make really wonderful Rorschachs and would allow me to just tie up any loose ends between the tar and feather paintings and the smoke paintings. So I'm always trying to make correlations between the work, or I'm discovering things in the process of doing the work. The smoke paintings actually led to the strip paintings, because in the process of making the smoke paintings, I'm laying down color, paint's dripping over the sides of the paintings, and at that time, I just became interested in the idea of controlling that line, or controlling that drip, in the sense where gravity's pulling this line, and how can I control it? So that really led to the strip paintings, which are these poured paintings, you know, in the tradition of everyone that's poured paint, and all the American painters that were making stripes. I mean, all the Abex artists that I've looked at some point have made stripes in their career. So it was a way for me to combine all the pourers and the stripers in making these works where basically I'm pouring paint and I'm manipulating the canvas. So I'm really controlling the ground or the painting itself, and gravity's pulling this line. And the earliest paintings, I was really interested in showing a skill. So I needed color A to be next to color B, that was next to color C. And if that wasn't the case, then I would have to re-pour that line. So these, stripe paintings, or strip paintings I call them, because they're somewhere between a stripe and a drip, started to form these little these stalactites at the bottom of the painting in those places where I needed to re-pour the paint. So that led me to make this discovery where I'm making these paintings. All of a sudden, now paint is going beyond that bottom edge of the painting, and I'm encroaching upon a third dimension, where painting's generally just dealing with 2 dimensions. So I just found that I'm making paintings now that, here's a good example, this is a horizontal strand, but the idea of that drip going into a third dimension, into space, really, for me, was a way for painting to challenge sculpture. And now, all of a sudden, I'm making paintings that are encroaching on a space that was really held by sculpture itself. So that led to, so the strip paintings, here's a good example. You can see it on the right-hand side. So that's an area where I had issues pouring the paint. So the repetition of trying to get the colors next to each other in a seamless way led to those stalactites. Those paintings, the strip painting, and you can see on the edge of the paintings, basically those are my fingerprints. So there's a lot of manipulation in moving the paintings. The strip paintings led to the strip edge paintings, where now all of a sudden I'm not concerned with the aesthetic of the stripe. I'm reusing this traditional format of painting in a way to push painting into that third dimension, and soon I'm going to arrive at a place where I no longer need this traditional format of a painting to suspend paint. I can arrive at these strand pieces, which are basically the idea of unstretched paintings. An unstretched painting still exists as a painting. The strand pieces are made of the most basic ingredients of any painting, which is, here's an example of a strip edge painting. So that's raw linen, and I'm really just painting that bottom edge to extend paint into that third dimension. The strands are made up of linen or canvas, a gesso coat, and then a top coat. So really just trying to make elemental paintings in the most basic way that, in my mind's eye, are isolating polished drip, challenging Barnett Newman zip, and bringing painting a new form, which are these very simple strand pieces, which are basically drips in my eyes. That was an example of a strip painting making a byproduct. So in the process of pouring paint, I'm manipulating this canvas, and then there was a lot of excess material that I just started to place paper under the canvases to keep paint off. Basically, it was a utilitarian way to keep paint off of my studio floor. And it took a while before I saw those as works in themselves. I happened to be working for David Salley at the time. I had worked for numerous artists out here, and each time I became engaged in the process of that artist. I've been looking for processes that engage me, and also exploring how other people. I'm always interested in how other artists are making work. And process at that time, for me, I was exploring Warhol and the ideas of the factory, working with assistants or not working with assistants. And I'm making these paintings where there's this line being poured, and in my own mind, I'm considering the hierarchy of what is my gesture or my control over this pour, and then just the organic nature of that pour once it leaves the canvas that I'm working on. So you have this continuous line where I'm manipulating it in the top half, and then there's a very organic nature of just capturing it in the bottom half of the, whatever's below it, whether it's a canvas or a work on paper. So I just saw this evolution of the strip paintings going into the strip paintings with the byproduct paintings. And that's how I evolved at those utilitarian works that suddenly became, part of my vocabulary.
So Matt, would you say that everything that you've done started from the original
I so in the grand scheme of things, I'm hopeful that my signature, in some way, is the manner of my thought, you know, and the ideas that I'm interested in engaging in. I mean, at some point, I'm just hoping that, you know, there's a painting of mine somewhere, and maybe people don't know that I made the painting, but there's a relationship between, you know, that audience saying, oh, that's something that, you know, Matt Satz could have found, you know, interesting to explore in that area. You know, even these tondos. So these tondos are basically drawings that I made where these are the next extension of the strip paintings. So I went from the strip paintings to the strip edge paintings, strip paintings with the byproduct paintings, and then it's like, where do you go after that? You know, it's like, I'm going to explore the idea of making these tondos, and I'm going to pour paint from the center of the canvas now instead of the top of the canvas, and I'm going to deal with, you know, this, you know, very traditional format of the tondo, and I'm going to pour paint from the center of this circle, and paint's now going to extend beyond, and will, you know, in some ways, you know, relate to that silhouette up there, or to the sun, or, you know, these very, you know, religious icons that were done during the Renaissance. You know, so I'm you know, with broad parameters in your vocabulary, there are places to always explore. And I feel, you know, I come from a science. Both my parents were science teachers. I come from a science household, let's say. So there needs, for me, there needs to be evidence of why I'm making the work that I'm making. There needs to be, you know, some truth in it, you know, or a theory that can be explored. I'm not, the marks and works are not coming from an ego as much as they're coming from an exploration of the environment and everything that's come before me up until that point. So to get back to your question, there certainly is an evolution in the work. Do I believe that the origin of that work is you know, the flypaper paintings? I mean, you know, as a 7-year-old, my parents sent me to this camp, Usedan, which was, you know, a camp for artists and singers and musicians. And at the time, I had this teacher by the name of Mr. Fink, who had me carving these stones. And I'm making these anthropomorphic forms, which I didn't know what they were at the time. I just came to me. And he said to my parents that, you know, your son's making work that looks like Henry Moore. So as a 7-year-old, you know, I'm going to explore who Henry Moore is, you know, and I didn't necessarily find a hero in that or a champion, but there was a relationship, you know, and it's like, as a 7-year-old now, I'm looking at Henry Moore and I'm looking at other art, or, you know, because somebody's telling me that I'm doing something that is, there's a relationship to this larger venue. So, I guess Henry Moore would be my first artist that I was looking at. So, yes, Sherry.
In the flypaper paintings and also in the smoke paintings, there seems to both of them concern time as a device or as a consideration. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Well, the flypaper paintings, there's a flypaper painting that's been sitting in I started making those in '98. And there is a lifespan because the glue ends up drying at some point and stops accepting material. So whatever is stuck in that painting up until the time of it fully drying is the evidence of that painting's lifespan. The smoke paintings, I have a much smaller window of time in order to work with them because I'm basically laying down a color or colors as a ground, and I'm dealing with a drying time in order.
I meant more like conceptually.
Oh.
Smoke is highly ephemeral, right? And so you're attempting to capture something that is ephemeral, completely ephemeral. And then it's sort of a similar process with the flypaper paintings in that you're slowing down something that is ephemeral should be fleeting, but instead it gets trapped in the surface of the painting. So I was just thinking that through as sort of like, a fourth dimension, if there are three, dimensionality in terms of 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions that you're also working with time.
No, and I think it relates to the strip paintings as well. I'm dealing with this, depending upon the viscosity of the paint, I mean, there's a meditation that's happening, waiting for this line to be poured, to get from point A to point B, and having to be, engaged in that process in order to fulfill the requirements that I have for that line being poured, and then, there's a moment where I can walk away, which is basically that point where the paint gets from the top to the bottom of the canvas, and then there's a byproduct painting there that's being made without my attention, or with my attention, but not to the degree of making the painting itself. So, I mean, there's an organic sensibility in my work, and there's definitely a sense of, that organic nature, and I think there is an element of time, the more that we explore it. I mean, I don't know if there's I did these American mandalas, which is another series. I don't know if we have an image of it, but basically it started with this 7 by 10 inch grid on a 8.5 by 11 sheet of graph paper with millimeter boxes in it. So I have 45,000 boxes in which I decided to place a dot of ink in each of those boxes. And just in the nature of the paper alone, I would make a mark that I thought was, in the middle of that box, or here's one right here, actually. So this is actually a 7 by 10 inch grid with 45,000 boxes. In each of those boxes, I place a dot of ink. And if that dot of ink touches a line, I start over, or if the cotton rag in the paper soaks up that ink and shoots it through this machine-made grid, which I thought was a perfect grid, I would have to start over. So, those works are related to the idea of the sand mandala and these, people playing with sand and making these very impermanent works, and just the practice of, the spirituality and religiosity of artworks made in the vein of persistence, strive for perfection, and working within parameters that I thought were controlled to a certain degree, but not concrete. And in the process of making those works, which 45,000 boxes, if I did 2,000 boxes in an 8-hour day, hunched over my desk, that was like a full day. So, and that's not to say that there was success in the end of making that mandala. There were many times where I started crumpling them up in frustration and throwing them out until a friend of mine said, he's like, I want one of those frustrated ones, one of those incomplete ones. And I didn't even realize that there was a market for those. But the guy making the tour, they're skinning the goat, which is a 2-week process. They're making vellum, which is a process in itself. And, if the scribe messes up one mark, the whole thing is trash. So the mandalas were really this strive for perfection within these parameters that, again, I thought were concrete. But in examining, I would do 100 boxes or 200 boxes, and it was a real process where I would do 5 across, 5 across, and sometimes in boredom I would try and change that mechanism just to make it more challenging, and sometimes I would be successful and sometimes I wouldn't. But in going to check if I did 100 or 1,000 boxes perfectly, I started using this loop. And the interesting thing about the paper itself is that I just assumed that this machine-made grid was a perfect grid, but when you look at that paper under a loop, you realize that just the nature of the paper doesn't allow the ink to be sucked into the paper on a single plane. So I'm working with this grid that I assumed was a perfect grid, but in researching it and looking at it under a loop, you realize that the grid doesn't even touch itself in certain places, that it's really an incomplete grid. So it's really just the idea of these parameters that I was working within that I basically created for myself because it didn't really exist. So, and then, That's an example of one of my grid works where, there's a system in those. There's 18 colors in those 18 sheets. In each of those sheets, there's a single color that dictates a pattern, and then they're basically rules, So like, seeing that work next to the solid, that's the idea behind those grid pieces, is that there's a system in place that I'm playing with. There's a certain amount of flexibility in dealing with those parameters that I've set, but there are rules and there are laws. And the success in that work is that I've been able to complete something where it's well within the parameters of whatever those ideas or rules are that I've set for myself. So, yes.
Tell us about the evolution and revision of your understanding of fluid dynamics, particularly thinking about sort of there's a contrast between the gravity and the drips, and sure as about the ephemeral and the smoke, which has its own fluidity to it based on.
Well, like I said, there's an organic sensibility in the work. I'm working with these larger forces and just trying to put my imprint on dealing with forces that are larger than myself. So.
Your science background, your sensibility, sort of led to me this idea that you really needed to put yourself into studying that, to understand that in a way that was more than just that strictly organic process.
Well, the root of all this work is really having a broad awareness of a history of art making and of specifically painting. And I'm really interested in ideas that have been explored by artists that have come up with elegant solutions to problems. So the idea of the tar and feather paintings, we can go back to, we could look at someone like Chris Burden, who made this piece called Samson, which was basically a turnstile in a museum space that invited attendees to the show and was connected to these basically posts that, the turnstile is connected to posts that were connected to the weight-bearing walls of the institution. So the more people that came to see the show, the potential for this turnstile to create a situation that would cause destruction to the institution, for me, was a very interesting idea. So the success upon people coming to see this work would ultimately lead to the destruction of the institution. So it's ideas like that that I'm interested in. I'm not a scientist looking for approaches to making art through scientific processes. I'm interested in using whatever the process is to find a solution to an art historical problem. Ed Ruscha made a painting of the LA Museum on fire. Like I said earlier, as an artist, if you're interested in pioneering, you need to figure out a way to there's a patricide that needs to happen in some type of sense. So, it's really the idea is paramount, and then I'm looking for a process that best gets that idea across. So it's not like I'm looking for a process in order to make an artwork. The process has to inform the idea. So, and I'm interested, all the information is in the painting. It's just a matter of somebody spending time with that work. I'm not hiding a mechanism, So the face value of the painting really explains, maybe not in the historical context for someone that's not tuned into it, but all the evidence of making the work is in the painting. So.
Matt, it seems like there's a lot of thought and a lot of patience in making the work. Can you talk a little bit about the process of just your work style, and do you go to the studio and contemplate, or?
I mean, I don't know that there's a moment that I'm not thinking about work. That it's always in the background. I'll be listening to a song that will spurn some idea that gets examined later. I could think of something, that might not be a concrete solution at the time, but, over a couple of months or a couple of years, you realize, that there's an idea there that's worth exploring. I go to work almost every day. I'm in the studio. At least I'm stepping into the studio. I'm not inspired every day. Chuck Close at one point said something about inspiration. I forget what the exact phrase was, but it was like, if you're waiting for, something about dreamers or amateurs wait for inspiration, the rest of us just go to work. It's like, the ideas happen by being in the space and being around the work. It's a full-time gig, And then, fortunately, to say something about this community, I really lucked out in finding myself in this place because there's a tremendous amount of sophistication here. I've been able to make a living since I turned 30. I told myself I wouldn't call myself an artist until I could make a living doing it. And, by the graciousness and sophistication of this community, I've been able to exist as an artist, as a painter, with there being an audience here, but also that level of sophistication, and certainly, the financial means to support someone who's in the position that I'm in. And it's a constant hustle. I've been with good dealers and gallerists, and I've been with, ineffective ones. So, it's really just about doing the work, and if I'm not doing the work, then I'm not surviving. So, it's a double-edged sword. Everyone's striving to get to the next level, and I have moments where, I have a cushion and then I don't, and when I don't, it's a constant hustle. My friends all know, So, but, I'm committed, and as much as I put into it, I get out of it. So, art's really been, I just turned 53. I've been doing this for, 23 years already, which is miraculous, and I'm grateful. So, and I'm grateful for this community, and, to be in the company, Sarah to recognize my work, and to, Solowit was a hero of mine. He's in my top 10, as far as artists making work. So, M.L. Bachner. We wouldn't have conceptualism if it wasn't for Solowit. He's the one that defined the whole movement. So, and looking around, this is the context that I'm interested in being in. So, again, I want to thank Sarah. Well, I have the moment to, to recognize the work and to allow me to have this dialogue, and, and I'm interested, at some point I'm waiting for these smoke paintings to be in the company of a Lewitt, a Twombly, and a Martin, and let's see whose marks, let the marks battle it out.
How do you feed your inspiration? What do you do to get inspired, to keep being inspired?
I think I'm past the point of being inspired. Like I said earlier, I just go to work. I have a vast library, and working for Glenn Horowitz gave me the opportunity to see a lot of work in a small space. Also, when I first came out here, Southampton College had an amazing art library, and I spent a lot of time in the library there. So, not to say that I'm not inspired, but I just went into the city. There was an Agnes Martin painting that I wanted to see at MoMA. I just went in to go see that work. And when there are artists that pop up that I'm really interested in, Piero Manzoni, there's a Piero Manzoni at a show at Michael Werner right now that I went to see the same day I went to go see that Agnes Martin. It's I don't know. It's the idea that that inspires me to make work. And that idea can come from anywhere. It can come from a lyric of a song that I hear on the radio. It can be a connection that I make that, you know, I don't know what the reason for that thought coming into my head is, but it's, whatever inspiration there is requires a lot of work for me to say that I'm inspired by it. Like, it has to go into the crucible, and I have to make a bunch of connections in order for it to be worthy of me pursuing that and to spend the time in pursuing whatever that inspiration or thought is. So a lot of things need to come together for me in order to substantiate the effort that's going to go into whatever that is. So it's just a good idea. You know, once a good idea shows up, and that, you know, that could happen in the shower. You know, I mean, it's happened. I mean, and sometimes I'm making work that I don't even realize I'm making. Those byproduct paintings just happen to arrive one day, even though I had been doing them for months or years at the time, where I was able to say to myself, oh, these are works in themselves. These are finished work. This is no longer a utilitarian way to keep paint off of the floor, you know. So, you know, for me, I need to be able to make an intellectual, there needs to be an intellectual reasoning for that to come into my vocabulary, if that makes sense. So, Sherry?
Or Sarah, I think Sarah had one first.
I did. Can you talk about the muscle paintings?
So the muscle works came. I've always been. So this is the idea of text-based work. Mel Bachner, Christopher Wool, Lawrence Weiner, you know, artists that I've always looked at. You know, the idea of these text-based works was always in the back of my mind. And it's like, this is a space that artists that I'm influenced by and respect have all delved into. And the majority of their work is text-based, and some is not. I mean, Barbara Kruger. It was an area that I had interest in delving into. And during the pandemic, I spent a lot of time walking the beach out here. And Marcel Brothers had come up at some point in my awareness, where he was basically making these works of mussels, where he would pour resin, attach them to paintings. They were just these very unique works that stuck out in my head. And as I'm walking the beaches out here, there were mussel shells everywhere. And Brothers always related them to him recognizing being home. But the reality is that this guy was going to a restaurant, leaving with the mussel shells and making these artworks out of these mussels. And here I am walking the beach, and I'm like, these are much, I don't know if I would say much more related to me being home, but this is my relationship with these things. Here they are. I'm going to start collecting them, and I'm going to do an homage in a way to Marcel Brothers, who, you know, at 40 decided to become a painter because he wasn't making any money being a poet. So I just saw this strange, you know, humorous approach to art making, that here we have a poet who's has this connection to the sea, and I'm going to start making these artworks that allude to Marcel Brothers, allow me to make text-based works, and that was really the origin. And in making these text-based works, I basically pulled artists and poets that had some type of relationship to the sea. I pulled them all together, and I started making I made 18 works based upon titles or references to the sea. And in dealing with the text, I had the idea of having a painting being read in the round. So there are titles of the works on the face of the paintings, but on the edge of the paintings, where in the past my fingerprints would be, or the evidence of my work would be, are phrases or titles or words that relate to the specific title of that work. So the edges of the paintings are show words that are printed in verso so that they correctly reflect into these solid brass frames that I made. So there's this, here you can see on the bottom of that work, in that Dear Little Sister piece, you can see on the edge of that painting there in pink, there's text that's in verso. So that reflects into the brass frames so that they could be read correctly. And I just, you know, for me, it was a way to engage in that area where I'm making text-based works, and they actually need to be read in the round. So, you know, the painting in that way acts as a device to, you know, move someone's eye and to also make a statement in that sense.
Matt, the community out here, you mentioned when you came, or sometime after you came, you found very vibrant, you found a lot of support, salon type atmosphere. Did that go away? Did you see pockets of it again?
It's just changed. I mean, to be honest, I didn't, you know, so if Henry Moore was my first introduction to art as a child, it wasn't until, you know, I was already contemplating graduating and looking at the work of Roy Lichtenstein, who, you know, for his aesthetic I just found super attractive. Not that I wanted to make work like that, and nor did I even perceive that I was going to be an artist at that point. Art was just something that I always did. I thought I would get into advertising, you know, be in a group of, you know, creative people, thinking about ideas, shooting them back and forth, and arriving at a place where, you know, there's a solution to a problem, and in the end, you know, the idea of selling things to me it wasn't. I realized I couldn't work for anyone. That's the reality. The more I started exploring the world of advertising, the less interested I was in it. But I thought I could make money and support the habit of making art. You know, it's like I always, if something came to my mind, there were moments where I wanted to be able to create what it was that I saw. You know, so I always had that, even as a young kid. But, you know, the pathway to being an artist, it wasn't something that I knew that I was going to pursue coming out of Brandeis. I was a fine arts major there. I went to Brandeis to play basketball, and I was struggling in economics to get B's. I took an art class, and all of a sudden I'm getting A's, and my professor at the time, who studied under John Walker, and then, you know, opened the door to this pathway to an MFA at Yale, which I decided not to do because I didn't know at the time that it could have been beneficial. You know, said, why don't you be a fine arts major? I said, you know, why should I struggle getting B's and dealing with math all day when this is something that comes naturally to me and I can pursue it? So, you know, that kind of, you know, pushed me that way. But then it's like, how do you do this full time? You know, or how do you pursue this as a career? You know, or how do you just be independent in life, you know, pursuing something that you're interested in doing? You know, so, I mean, I saw a lot of people growing up around me that had these pursuits that, you know, just didn't make anyone happy. You know, so if it was anything, I just wanted to pursue something that I could fully engage myself in doing and enjoy the process. And, you know, back to getting out here and to come back to your question specifically, you know, at the time in '95, all the galleries were leaving Soho to go to Chelsea. And I had to jump on it because I had a friend that worked I was going to SVA. I graduated Brandeis, I'm going to SVA, because as an art director in advertising, you need to learn how to use a computer now. You need to know InDesign, you need to know Photoshop, and there was one other that I took classes in, because all of a sudden the copywriter and the art director didn't have the person on the computer. The art director now was the guy on the computer. So I took some classes at SVA. I ended up getting this weird job for a woman that was running Flash Art magazine, and you know, I'm going to the Gramercy Hotel for the first, what became Art Basel, you know, the first art fair at the hotel there, and, embedding myself in a way with someone who, knew all the dealers because they were all advertising with her, and it was an entree into the art world. And I'm aware that Soho is now moving to Chelsea. There's space everywhere. So I go and I start looking for space, and just, looking around Chelsea at that time, there were no bodegas. You walk down the street, there were dime bags and, sex workers running around and people squatting in 601 West 26th Street. I mean, it was just a totally different time. It was like the Wild West in a sense, and I just couldn't see myself having a job all day and then going back to a creative space to make work. I just didn't see it, nor could I afford it. And around that time, Jimmy Ernst had an artist alliance out here where, 2 weekends out of the year over the summer, there was this artist studio tour where you could come out here, you join the Artist Alliance, you could get health care, and they would give you a map to, 80 artist studios. So you would see 40 artist studios in a weekend. And I had been coming out here as a kid. My dad, spent a little time in Montauk, so I knew of the area. I didn't know the significance of the artistic community out here. I just knew that the ocean was there, it was a beautiful place, there was space, and there was always this mystique attached to Eastern Long Island. I mean, Huntington, where I grew up, is an hour and 20 minutes away, which in its own right was a wonderful place to grow up. We had the Heckscher Museum, Harry Chapin, Billy Joel, there were creatives there as well. Ray Johnson spent time there. But I didn't feel any connection to the art world there. There was just, I was pursuing basketball much of my, sixth grade to high school, and spent a lot of time playing basketball. But, so Jimmy Ernst had this studio tour, and I come out here, and I end up at this amazing potato barn in Wainscott or Sagaponack, where this artist by the name of Terry Elkins was residing in half of this barn, and Steve Miller actually owned the barn. And it's an amazing structure, 10-minute bike ride to the ocean. I walk in there, and Frank Stella's paints are lined up against one wall. There are these John Chamberlains that I later learned that John was throwing off of the roof. There was a Donald Judd in the woods, a discarded Donald Judd, and just an amazing space, beautiful light, and this guy Terry Elkins, who was my parents' age at the time, and a guy from Texas who was a landscape painter, and evidence of someone pursuing this path. And I just became comfortable enough with Terry, knowing that I had someone out here, potentially, that I could call, in case I needed something. And if it wasn't Terry that was going to help me directly, it could be a circle of friends. So, that's kind of how I got my start out here, was just, someone embracing me in a way where I just was confident with this person, and I knew that somebody would be looking over me in that sense. So, from going to Terry Elkins to, realizing that Roy Lichtenstein is in Southampton, I didn't even know that Jackson Pollock was buried down the road, or that Bill de Kooning was out here, so slowly over the years, and certainly, getting a job at Glenn Horowitz opened up a bunch of doors for me because everyone was coming in there. They were doing shows with Ross Bleckner, April Gornick, and I had access to all this amazing material. Vladimir Nabokov's first editions with butterfly drawings inscribed to his wife, James Joyce's personal copy of Ulysses with annotated notes in the margins. There was just like this cultural treasure trove of material and people coming in to see it. So, I went from knowing one person to, that circle really broadening with, really people that were at the top of their game in whatever they were doing, whether they were, Donna Karan or Calvin Klein coming in, whether they were in fashion or literary people like Joseph Heller I met, came in there one day with a screenplay. It was just like an amazing place to be. And then, over time, I would get a job. I worked for Brian Hunt for a little while, like I said. I worked for, David Sally. I worked for Miriam Shapiro. I just did what I had to do in order to make enough money to pay my rent, and I was making art when I wasn't working for somebody else, So, my circle, slowly grew and grew and grew. And, in the context of all those names that I've mentioned, I'm trying to find my own voice, and I put a lot of pressure on myself, I would say, in order to, if you're going to call yourself an artist in this community, you need it to have a good game, and that's the reality. And I'm grateful that I've found this group of artists that I found. I mean, nobody really cared about American painting until Pollock, and then all of a sudden you find out that his house is down the road, and he's working in this tiny little studio space, and then, Ad Reinhardt's buried, 600 feet from him, so I feel the ghost is still around, and there's a dialogue that I'm having, whether, these smoke paintings talk about sfumata and the idea of going back to the early Renaissance, where they're basically using, these giant sticks and candles on top of them to make these very crude grid systems on the ceilings of the chapels in order to break up the planes. I mean, the smoke paintings, there's a dialogue to be had, with artists during the early Renaissance, and I'm looking at Botticelli, and then all of a sudden, someone like Malcolm Morley will pop up, and he's doing the School of Athens, and in the process of making these paintings of his, he's doing these crude grids, and he's painting box by box, and it gets to a point where, he fucks up and he misses a box and continues making the painting, makes this decision to continue making the painting, and in the process of missing a box, he ends up scalping two of the people in the painting. So, it's for someone, and then to bump into Malcolm Morley at the Parish Museum, to get invited to his studio, it's just been magical for me to have met people that have significantly influenced the path that I've chosen to be on, and that was just a random, Malcolm Morley isn't somebody that I studied in college. I mean, I worked for David Sally. It was only years after, in putting my library together, that I realized one of my textbooks had a cover image of a David Sally on it. Like, I didn't know who David Sally was. I wasn't really interested I wasn't interested in finding artists that were going to influence me. It just kind of happened, It was like, oh, that's a brilliant idea. Like, this guy has something to offer me, and it just ends up that some of the most significant artists of the contemporary art world happen to be here, or are buried here, or passed through here. I had the opportunity to meet Jasper Johns in '97, just because I ended up on St. Martin with a girlfriend of mine, and his phone number was in the phone book. And for 2 weeks, I was passing his house saying, there's Jasper Johns' house, there's Jasper Johns' house. And didn't have the confidence to go in there. And then one day I made the decision to show up. So here's someone who's paramount in influencing me, and really opened the doors for me, as far as, the lusciousness of his mark making, the ideas that he was putting into his paintings, and I show up in this guy's driveway, and he opens his arms to me, and I spend 2.5 hours at his place in St. Martin. Nobody's going to supersede the importance of that interaction, nor his influence on me in moving forward at any time. So I've also been very fortunate to have engaged these people. You know, Robert Irwin's another one. You know, John Chamberlain, you know, was always very loving and great to me. Keith Saunier, you know, I mean, these aren't people that I necessarily sought out. They just kind of showed up, you know, and I feel like, you know, going back to your question about the community here, I mean, I had super influential people, you know, with historical context, engaging me in a dialogue, you know, and it's just, there's just wisdom there that you don't get from anywhere else. You know, Robert Longo, I got into this conversation with Robert Longo, and he's like, he said to me, he's like, in the historical canon, you get one image. You know, like in a collegiate textbook, you get one image. You know, if you're Jasper Johns, you get 3. You know, and it's like, where does that, you don't hear that. You know, it's like, it's just one of those magical moments where someone's had that experience and they're willing to share it with you. It's not something that you think about. You know, so I've just been in the right place at the right time. You know, for whatever those moments were, to keep me going. So, anything else?
Are there any other questions? Matt, thank you so much.
No.
Thank you for the loan. Thank you for talking today.